Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick overview and then kick it off to the rest of the team to go into more detail about all the subject matter that Matt just went over. For some of you or any of you who are not familiar with what ARC is, we are many things. We have many charters, many regulations that we have to respond to, but from a transportation standpoint, the key word is MPO, if you're not familiar with that. Metropolitan Planning Organization. We exist, we're a creature of federal regulation. We exist by federal law, but we are not federal employees. We're not state employees, not local employees. We're actually a nonprofit organization, the way ARC is actually set up. But nonetheless, we fulfill all the federal transportation requirements for the Atlanta urbanized area. So the umbrella here just shows you all the other things we do, and we're very fortunate as transportation planners to have all this other subject matter inside our house under one roof. So we can coordinate with folks who are working on aging issues, for example, aging in place, or water quality, water quantity, stormwater management, all kinds of things that either affect our work or vice versa. We even have Homeland Security, which is, if you don't know by now, they're updating the regional evacuation plan. These are, if you're also not familiar with our geographic footprint, it's 20 counties. Here are the counties here, which represents 50% of Georgia's population. The key deliverable, we do many things from a transportation perspective, but the key deliverables, I would say, are the Regional Transportation Plan and the Transportation Improvement Program, also known as TIP. You all are probably familiar with this. These are federal requirements. They have to be updated pursuant to federal law, and there's all kinds of factors and criteria that go into all this, and I'll spare you all the detail if you don't already know it. But just know that the TIP is where the money hits the road. The RTP is a long-range forecast of where we forecast socioeconomic conditions and land use and population and jobs and all that stuff, and we use those trends to figure out where are the best transportation investments over time, like for example 20 years out. But the TIP is where the money is in terms of implementing projects. That's probably what most of you are interested in on a day-to-day basis. There are 16 other MPOs throughout Georgia, meaning that the urbanized area defined as being 50,000 people or more. So anytime you reach that threshold, you have to have an MPO by federal law to coordinate all the urban area planning. And even though they use the term urbanized area, as far as defining where an MPO exists, every area, including the Atlanta one, has obviously rural area and rural character as well, which presents a different complexity for us relating to, the one size doesn't really fit all. And if you're interested in learning more about the MPOs, there's a website here. We have a statewide organization. Okay, so that's it. Any questions on MPO before we move over to Shayna? No? Okay. Come on, Shayna. Shayna's going to talk to you about regional transit planning initiatives, and then the rest of the folks will get into more detail about all the other stuff.
Like Kofi said, I work on all types of transit initiatives here, specifically regional long-range planning and visioning, as well as implementation and coordination of our regional operators. So I wanted to just touch on a few of the projects that we've been working on recently that might be interesting to you. The first is that we are updating our regional, you took something off. We are updating our regional we are updating our regional transit vision right now. It was originally adopted in 2008. And then we did an update in 2012, and we're going back in right now talking to all of our stakeholders, all of the operators in the Atlanta region, and trying to outline a long-range, unconstrained vision for what we want to see 40, 50, 60 years out. There's not really a year or a dollar sign put on this plan, but it's more what we want to see if we could have any project. So we're kind of getting to the final stages of this. It's an 18-month-long project. And right now we're sitting around 61 projects, might go up or down by one or two, but generally. And basically it's an all-encompassing project list, so it's based on the Concept 3 list that we had before, but then we went back in, met with all of the stakeholders that had proposed projects on that list, looked at all of the local transit plans that have happened since 2012, looked at the more MARTA planning, and then all other state, local, and regional plans, talked to stakeholders over the course of the 18 months, and then we've reduced and combined the list down to make sure that we actually have sponsors for each of the projects that are going into the plan. And so we have, let's see if this works. So we've developed a draft project map. It's not beautiful yet because it's still in progress. Ooh, it might not work. I think it's tied to me. Okay, you can't see it, but this is the old one, Concept 3, and there are less lines on the new one. So I can tell you that. This is a lot of lines. So yeah, we have project name, mode, sponsor, and eventually we're going to have a more stylized map like you're seeing here for concept 3. But I wanted to kind of break down a little further into what type of project you're seeing on this list, because I think it's pretty interesting to see where the region is moving towards. So of the 61 projects, we can see that the bulk of them really fall into arterial rapid transit. So that's 26 of the projects. So generally, we define ART as the mode that travels in mixed traffic, but they include technology for signal prioritization, queue jumping. There's a nicer design for the stations. You might have level boarding or pay off board the vehicle. So it's a really low cost way to improve local bus service. Actually, I was just in Minneapolis last week looking at their arterial rapid transit, and just implementing small things like queue jumping there, they saw about 30% increase in ridership over the last year since they finished it for $30 million. So that's a pretty low investment. So that's where the region's kind of going in terms of the vision here, I would say. We see 26 arterial rapid transits, 5 BRT, so that's similar attributes except for that it has dedicated right-of-way. So of course that build-out is longer, more difficult to acquire that right-of-way, etc. And then we have a few of the more intensive modes, light rail, commuter rail, streetcar. So we're kind of all over, but again, we're focusing on that ART, and I know the More MARTA project list that came out a couple of weeks ago that was all over the paper had some ART projects in it too, so I'm excited to see that roll out regionally. Okay, but I also wanted to dig into what's happening with local planning studies. So last year, ARC was the project manager for the Fulton County Transit Master Plan. So all Fulton County came together and they worked on a vision again, although theirs is constrained, to look at implementing some transit in the county. And one of the things that I really wanted to draw out of that plan was that they identified microtransit as a way to kind of close the gaps in the system. So microtransit is kind of an on-demand, using smaller vehicles, similar to your Uber or Lyft that you think about, except for that it's running on agency-owned vehicles. And so that's something that was called out in the Fulton County Transit Master Plan. Similarly, we didn't have as strong of a role, but the Connect Gwinnett Transit Plan also called that out as an option, and Gwinnett's actually moving into implementing microtransit in Snellville, starting shortly on agency-owned vehicles. So I think that's interesting and something to be watching out for. And then we're kicking off the DeKalb County Transit Master Plan shortly, and we'll see what comes out of that. We'll be taking the group to Minneapolis. And then the third thing I do is really operator technology coordination, working with operators on service. So I wanted to call out a few things that are happening there. I just like this picture of these old MARTA buses, mostly because we're working on unified transit asset management. So there's a federal reg that we have to look at transit asset management. All operators everywhere in the country have to be looking at it and developing a plan by October. So we're working with our regional transit operators to make sure that we're all using the same system and we can all use one technology so we can talk to each other and help to advance things like regional procurements, and that'll all be cloud-based, and we think it'll really improve the way that we budget for and then acquire rolling stock moving into the future. A couple of other things, we just entered into an agreement with Remix, which again is a cloud-based software that will help all of our regional transit providers for the first time to be using the same software as they work on improving local bus service. So for the first time, you'll be able to pull up your map in real time and see what's going on. It's based on GTFS feeds, which I'll talk about in a second. You'll be able to pull it up and you can see what people around you are doing and what the other operators are doing. So it really helps us to focus on planning regionally instead of just siloed locally. And then the last is Breeze. We've had Breeze implemented here for a while, but you guys may have seen that, I guess, last week, CERTA said that they're going to be moving away from offering their paper ticket cards and moving just exclusively onto the Breeze system for the first time this summer. So again, that's an exciting and encouraging step towards regional coordination. And then the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of regional coordination is GTFS feeds and then how that's playing into our regional bus stop signage project. So some of you may have heard about the regional bus stop signage project because it's been around for a while. That's what happens when you have to work with a number of different operators on something complex. But we're finally getting there, and we released an RFP. It's on the street right now for a vendor for regional bus stop signage, and that will be all of the regional operators that service the downtown area will be using the same signage. This is a spec of one of the nicer, more expensive of the option signs for really like high visibility locations. But going along with this on the more technology side is that we wanted to ensure that for the user, if they were to walk up to the bus stop, they could see what the bus stop was. It would have a number, or in GTFS terms, a stop code printed on it. And they would be able to say, oh, I'm at stop code 110, and put it in their phone, and they would be able to see every bus that stopped there from every transit operator. And so we're moving in that direction right now. We've developed a regional nomenclature to make sure that there are shared stop codes for each of the regional transit operators, ensuring that it's easier for users and it's easier for the transit operators to keep track of their stops, and it's easier for the maintenance of these signs because we'll make sure that we know which routes need to be appearing on them. So that, like I said, started with GTFS, but it's moving into an implementation that we're going to see on the street.
So, freight planning at ARC. I'd like to start off with this slide to kind of show that we're doing a little more freight planning these days than we have in the past, but we've essentially been doing it off and on for about 15 years. Going back to 2003 when we created the ARC's Freight Advisory Task Force. This is kind of a mix of public and private entities as well as the academic sector, that meet and discuss freight issues as well as provide input on our freight planning process. Of course, if you're interested, you're welcome to attend these as well. Typically happen right here in this room as well. Information is on our website, or I can add you to my email list for that. First freight plan was adopted in 2008. This was a large, in-depth plan, took a couple years to complete, and really set the stage for what was to come in future years. Then one of the recommendations of that was to create a truck route master plan for Metro Atlanta. That was adopted in 2010. Not on the timeline is that I started here in 2014, so everything after that I was a part of. I was then the project manager on our regional freight plan update, which was completed in 2016. And so everything after that is kind of led out of recommendations from that plan. ITS has not necessarily been a big part of it in the past, but it certainly needs to be a part of it in the future, because certainly what's happening in the technology world is huge in the freight and logistics world, and certainly it is in transportation in general. So one of the recommendations that came out of our 2016 freight plan update was to look at regional truck parking. This has certainly been an issue nationally. Federal Highway Administration has delved into this because it is such an issue, and it is certainly a safety issue. As we were doing our freight plan update, we heard from some planners and elected officials in the region that this was a growing issue. They were seeing a lot more trucks parked on interstate highway ramps, on the side of the road, in vacant lots. It creates a number of different safety issues. But realistically, all we had was this anecdotal data, people saying this was a problem. We didn't really know how big of a problem it was, and so it was something we thought we needed to do a little deeper dive into. So last year we kicked off a study, wrapped it up this spring, so it is still kind of a high-level study. We're going through adoption of it right now with our board and committees, but expect that to be probably adopted here in June. The freight plan, or the truck parking study, focused on our MPO area that you see in green. As Kofi mentioned, that's all or portions of 20 counties, but it actually went a little bit further out. Looked at those adjacent counties that you see there, kind of that tan color. Realistically, we knew that those counties already had a lot of truck stops in them, so it didn't make sense for us to ignore them, even though they aren't within our boundaries. So delving into the data a little bit, ATRI. ATRI is the research arm of the American Trucking Association. They were also a sub-consultant on this plan, and one of the things that they do each year is release their top 10 list of critical issues in the trucking industry. They released the 2017 list last fall, and you can see number 4 on the list is truck parking, so certainly this is an issue for them. But I had to point out number 2 and number 3 because they also tie back into truck parking. Number 3 is hours of service requirements. These are federal government regulations that say that truck drivers can drive a maximum of 11 hours per day in a 14-hour time period, and after that they have to stop for a minimum of 10 hours. So when we're talking about that truck parking demand, it exists in part because of federal government regulations, in part because they have to stop for that minimum of 10 hours somewhere as they're driving. Of course, truck drivers get paid by the mile, so they want to go as far as they can, as fast as they can to maximize their earning potential. But for safety reasons, we want them to stop and rest overnight. So that's why this regulation is in place, so you have to stop for at least 10 hours. Separate but related to that, we have an issue with truck staging. Truck drivers will have an appointment for a pickup or drop off. If they're late, they're penalized. So essentially they have to get there early. And when they get there early, they're not typically allowed to actually wait on site. So you may see a truck parked during the middle of the day saying he's not sleeping. What is he doing? Well, he's waiting for his appointment time, and he's parked on the side of the road somewhere because he has nowhere else to go. So certainly that's a related issue. That's not necessarily part of the hours of service requirements, but certainly something we looked at in this study as well. Number 2 on this list was the ELD mandate. ELD stands for electronic logging devices. The hours of service requirements in the past, those were tracked by truck drivers literally using pen and paper.
you're using a paper log, you can kind of fudge the numbers when you need to if you're not quite making it and stopping when you need to. The federal government knew that was a problem and implemented the ELD mandate that said you have to use these GPS-enabled devices that know exactly when you're actually driving versus when you're resting, so you can't fudge those numbers anymore. That requirement kicked in December of last year. The penalties for that are kicking in this spring, and so realistically, we know that'll have some impact, but we don't know how much impact that'll have overall. This slide shows where you can actually find truck parking spaces in our region.
We don't actually have any public rest areas within our MPO boundaries. We do have a couple there in I-20 in Morgan County, as well as a welcome center there in Haralson County, neither of which are in our MPO area, but they're shown on this map. The brighter colors, the red and oranges, are where the most parking spaces are located. Fulton County in the middle has the most, but then after that, all those other counties that are bright like that are actually outside of our MPO boundary. So you kind of see Bartow, Jackson, Morgan, Butts, Haralson, and Carroll counties. Those are just on the edges of our region. So what happens, truck drivers have to stop either coming into our region or after they leave our region, because there's nowhere really in the heart of our Atlanta area where they can stop. The counties that are shown there in gray, they literally have no truck parking spaces. Those include some very large counties like Gwinnett and Cobb, which have huge populations, huge amounts of commercial development, and huge amounts of industrial development. So certainly there's a lot of truck traffic that's generated by those counties, as well as a lot just passing through on I-75 and I-85. It's worth also noting that there's really no truck parking spaces in North Fulton, only a couple in North DeKalb, and a couple in Forsyth County. So what you run into is a big swath of our region along and north of I-20, where there's virtually no truck parking spaces available. It kind of creates a no man's land for truck drivers. And when they run into that unexpected traffic that hits in an off-peak hour and suddenly get stuck in traffic, they have to find somewhere to stop because of those hours of service requirements and ELD mandate. So how do we deal with that? Honestly, most of the recommendations come down to a lot of zoning issues. We came at this from the transportation perspective, but what we found out is a lot of it is simply that it's very difficult to build a truck stop. There's no requirements on industrial developers to build anything, so a lot of it comes down to zoning. But a part of it too, also, we looked at technology. One of the challenges is truck drivers don't know where parking is available at any given moment. They know where those truck stops are, but is the space available? That's something they don't know. There are apps available that the truck stops operate that give them that information. They're not all that accurate, and so they may say that there are spaces available when in reality there are no spaces actually at those stops. So some DOTs have started delving into this as an issue. FDOT, Florida DOT, is actually installing pucks in truck parking spaces and rest areas. They're putting 2 or even 3 pucks per parking space. This is highly accurate compared to what's out there in the apps now. The challenge is it's also very expensive to do that and time consuming for them to go out and do that. Looking for something a little bit cheaper, we talked to a company called Cloud Park. They actually have a camera-based system in which you can they monitor downtown areas for on-street parking. Not related to trucks at all. This is really like on-street parking right out here. But we said, could you use this technology for truck stops and for rest areas? And they said, probably. We've never thought about it like that. And so it's something where they gave us some information. We've talked to them about it. It's certainly a cheaper option than going out and putting in 2 or 3 pucks in every single space. So it's something where on the technology side, I don't think anybody's quite figured out the best solutions yet, but it's something that we're continuing to look into. Of course, the challenge is once you have this data, you need to get it to the truck drivers. They can't legally use their smartphone as they're driving either. So that's another challenge. Is one, how do you get the information that they need? Then how do you get it to them? And not just the truck parking, but other information that may come through connected vehicle technology. So that's something, certainly we want to continue to look into. How do we better inform these truck drivers in our region? Lastly, I wanted to touch on our ARC freight cluster plans. This is a new planning process here at ARC. As we completed that freight plan update in 2016, we saw that we had a good grasp of the big projects in our region, the interchange projects, the major highway, roadway projects, things like that. We didn't know the local projects. We didn't know the intersection level projects or the ITS projects or any of the things that were kind of the smaller dollar projects that in comparison can still have a big impact. We didn't know it because we haven't done local planning in industrial areas. We've got a lot of local plans, but they've almost by definition ignored these industrial areas. So we started offering grants last year for $200,000 to $250,000 of federal funding plus a local match from the local sponsor of 20%. Got 4 applications for it last year from the Aerotropolis Atlanta CIDs, from the Gateway 85 CID in Gwinnett, from Spalding County, and from the Stone Mountain CID. We'll be funding all 4 of those. These will almost be like small area comprehensive transportation plans. We'll look at existing conditions, needs assessment. We'll have project recommendations. There'll definitely be a traffic study as a part of all these. Go out, do those peak hour turning movement counts, and let us know exactly what the needs are at those intersections, because those are key things that can really help move trucks from an interstate highway to their warehouses, distribution centers. Project recommendations might include roadway capacity or operations projects. Absolutely should consider bike, ped, and transit projects as well, because these industrial areas, they have a lot of employees that need to get to and from these jobs. A lot of folks don't have cars, they need to get there. And so we've heard from the private sector that literally just getting people to these jobs is a big challenge and impacts their turnover rates. And certainly we want to look at ITS projects, connected autonomous vehicle projects, and how the freight and logistics industry is changing, because certainly they have their own technology changes happening as well in their industry. And so this is something we haven't delved into in the past, is really looking at these areas, looking at this industry and how it all fits together from the transportation perspective. So these are starting, going into procurement now. One RFP has already been released. The other three are working on RFPs now. And even if you don't work on any of these four, we expect to continue offering these grants in the future, so we hope to do more of these in future years. With that, I will hand things over to Leslie.
I work on several things here at ARC. I'm going to talk about one program that I manage, which is Connect ATL. I'll give you a glance at what we did last year with Connect ATL and what we're doing this year. So last year was our first year with Connect ATL, where we had a summit on September 7th. I think a lot of you were there. And our keynote speaker was Mayor Ginther from Columbus, Ohio, awardees of the US DOT Smart Cities Challenge. They took $50 million and grew it to $500 million, and are doing amazing work and continuing to grow. So we invited him down to tell us about lessons he learned. That's the quote on the top left. Our city is a living laboratory. Continue to test, learn, and iterate. I think that makes most of you happy, because I think you guys like to tinker and think through tough challenges. And this is just a snapshot of kind of ideas we talked about throughout the day, just how quickly the pace of mobility, the changes in mobility are happening. So there's this scooter up here that at the time of the conference last year, electric scooters and a shared mobility concept wasn't even on our minds, and that's how quickly we're moving. There's a snapshot of a 3D printed autonomous vehicle shuttle, the Ollie by Local Motors. So we discussed freight and autonomy, and since then the NACTO guide for the blueprints for autonomous urbanism has come out. So all that has changed, and we've tried to capture these conversations of what will the future look like, and who needs to be at the table to make sure that the solutions are a right fit with the focus on people in our communities. So not technology for the sake of technology, but technology for the sake of solving something. So that is the purpose of Connect ATL. Since then, we've also launched the Georgia Smart Communities Challenge in partnership with Georgia Tech and Georgia Power. And announcements about the awardees for that will come out June 12th, so keep your eyes peeled. Another reason why we focus on Connect ATL was because, there it is. In 2016, we commissioned a report that I managed, the Regional Transportation Technology Policy Document. And this is one of my favorite outcomes of that policy document, is looking at what are current conditions, what are we doing well and not doing well. So we know congestion's high, emissions are high, fatalities and injuries are too high for our liking. Travel choices, reliability are low, and equity is pretty low in transportation in our region. And what can we do over the next few years, however long it actually takes for autonomous shuttles to gain mass adoption, and what do we need to do from policy perspectives? What are the outcomes we want? So that's the far right of the graph. We want to see emissions go down as we move to electric and figure out the energy supplies there. Fatalities, injuries go down. Travel choices, reliability go up, equity go up. Congestion stays kind of high, because I have the philosophy that if you have a desirable region, a desirable city, you're going to have people flocking to it, and congestion is just going to be something that you can measure. Obviously, we want to make it better, but we want to be desirable. Just a quick glance at who was at the last summit. We had, I apologize, we compressed the pictures and everything went haywire a bit. We had over 300 people, and that was intentional. We wanted to keep it small, and we wanted to have more local government voices. This goes back to the concept of helping figure out what technology solutions we want to see. Having local governments, local, state, federal, come and talk about what questions they have that personally I couldn't answer. So we included national voices from nonprofit and for-profit groups to the table. So these are just some of the faces that you could see on the panels. Also, other folks that came from a zip code perspective, we had good coverage around the MPO. At a city level, you can see we had a good representation of the big city of Atlanta, and mid-sized and smaller-sized cities. So that's really what we want to see continue to grow as we go forth with Connect ATL Summit in 2018. Is just get a variety of voices, because the solutions are not the answer to what is a smart city is not the same for all communities. And some great takeaways. I won't read through all of these. You can glance at them. The 8th one will be a secret for now, but my apologies. The 8th one, everything will be a secret. There we go. Sorry, the 8th one is just highlighting data security and how much we need to focus on data security as operators. So these are just the 8 things. The one that I will highlight is that freight may be the first to automate. I've just caught on to some mass media articles saying that maybe freight will be the first to automate. So we were ahead of the curve there, I think. So yeah, yes. So as I mentioned, we will have another summit in 2018. Again, it'll be at the Georgia Tech Hotel and Conference Center as it was last year, because they're fantastic. So September 7th, if you're around, please join us. We will be putting out a call for speakers and a call for exhibitors. So we'd love to engage with you guys. We already looped in Brian Mulligan and his team and some others here. So I know we're getting in your ears about it. And just a quick highlight of who we have or what ideas we have for this year's summit. We do have Ashley Hand from CityFi. She co-founded that with Gabe Klein, who you may have heard of. Anyway, she does a lot of smart cities visioning with different size cities, so I thought that would be a good fit for this audience. She also has something that she piloted in LA called the Transportation Happiness Index, so that's kind of interesting, and does a lot of work in AVs and CVs and different community types. So she's our headliner, and then we will be focusing on things we've learned about over the past year that are of note: cybersecurity, curb space management, the built environment. What can we build today, knowing that trends may change in the future? And for any new updates, please visit connectatl.org. I forgot to mention, in addition to the summit, Connect ATL has also had quarterly meetings at which we've had Bill Wells and Brian Mulligan participate, and we will continue to have those throughout the year. And as a final note, before I'll turn it over, I will be handing Connect ATL over to Melissa Roberts. If you've met her, great. If you've not, feel free to email her, mroberts at atlantaregional.org, as my last day is next week. So she will be the new me, or an improved me.
I'm still not getting over Leslie leaving. It's pretty much the worst. But speaking about technology leads us to our TSMO and ITS architecture update. TSMO, if you don't know, is Transportation Systems Maintenance and Operation. And there are a lot of federal reasons why we have to do this update, also want to do this update. A lot of it is that you want to try to reduce congestion using operations and management strategies before you go and try to expand all the roads, and also to increase safety and mobility. Also, we have to have a regional ITS architecture that's just mandated. And we already have a congestion management process, and that is required to also consider ITS technologies. But the interesting thing about ARC is that we've always been a huge advocate for TSMO projects and for operation projects. And we've also funded them a lot, but we've never had a huge coordinated effort to kind of bring everyone together on that. So that's really the biggest reason we want to have this kind of big plan. So some of the goals outright, stakeholder committee is one of the biggest goals out of this new plan. We really want to get a group of people together that are going to keep meeting even after the plan's over. Maybe quarterly, maybe we'll connect with Connect ATL and kind of merge all of that together. So we just keep having this conversation, especially because everything's changing so quickly. We need to have a conversation that's just in place already. We want to find the state of the region in terms of what do we have, what do other people have, what are we planning for, and how far is that going to take us, and what do we really need to work on more. And reviewing different types of data governance. We've been in talks with GDOT about trying to figure out where all this data is, where it should be stored. Should it all be stored in one place? Is that at ARC? Is it at GDOT? Is it each local government has their own? So that's going to be just the process of getting started, and that's going to be important more and more as we get requests for more data from not only governments but third-party app developers looking for smart intersection data, things like that. We also are updating our ITS architecture, which it's always kind of a throwaway line for me, but it is important, and we haven't done it really since 2004, updated in 2011 a little bit, but it's going to be hopefully something that ties together all this different technology and data in a way that we haven't really looked at yet. And we're also going to be looking for potential pilot project areas. That's going to be a very stakeholder-driven process. So a lot of the local governments, if they want pilots, that's probably going to be the first question. If they don't have to have them. But we're just going to see where it would make sense to do them, how we can help with that process. We want to build a guide for local agencies as well, just to say, here are your menu of options for operation projects. If you're having these kind of problems, if you're having a reliability problem, this is something you can look at. If you're having a congestion problem, this is something you can look at. Just to really drive home that we're looking for more TSMO projects when we ask for project solicitations, more than capacity projects. And then, of course, the strategic plan, we're looking to go out 5 years for an action plan and 10 years as an interim with a 20-year vision. And hopefully you all who want to propose already looked at the RFP because they are due June 6th. And if you are interested in reading more about the RFP, you can go to atlantaregional.org/procurement. And I look forward to updating you guys as this process rolls along.
So if you haven't seen my presentation in the past couple of years, ARC, we and I have been working on this kind of Walk, Bike, Thrive world. It started with a single report that was trying to serve as a regional strategic vision for doing walking and bicycling better in the region, both to support a range of goals that the region has, but also really with the core question of what does it take to really encourage more people to get out of their cars, to walk, bike, take transit, be in the city or any of the cities in the region a little bit differently. So I'll give you an update on where we stand, but kind of walk you briefly through the Walk, Bike, Thrive world and how we're approaching this particular set of transportation planning questions in a broader context of regional goals. We start, if you ever get a chance to work with me, I have a very people-first perspective. So the first thing we did with Walk, Bike, Thrive in 2015 was we went out and we did a lot of interviews. I think 30 or 45-minute interviews with people at different transit stations and trailheads, downtown streets, both in Atlanta and Midtown, as well as some of our historic town centers. And we got a really nice, diverse range of perspectives, really asking this core question in simply, why are people walking and bicycling? Why are they on commuter buses? Why are they on the train? What is it that draws them out of their car to move around the region differently? We put a lot of data behind that, and the second chapter of Walk, Bike, Thrive is really kind of a data atlas, which if you get a chance, the third chapter is our interviews, the second chapter is a data report, and it's worth reading, although it is 2015 data, so it's going to be time to update that soon. But one of the core pieces that we really pulled out of this is that where people walk and bike and ride transit are the places that are good for walking and bicycling or have opportunities to ride transit. The quickest snapshot of that is they are our cities. Of course, the city of Atlanta, but a lot of our historic downtowns have great main streets that are great for walking and bicycling. And even places that are smaller or denser or more proximate to destinations, villages and small centers, CDPs in the technical term, but places like Vinings and Tucker, that are small places really attract a lot of trips internally, even if those aren't regionally significant trips, or commute trips. There's capture a lot of internal trips. We have a lot of data to back that up. But we boiled a lot of that down into two broad strategies that we in the Bike Ped program and Walk Bike Thrive really lean heavily on. One is to make great places, so find places that are good opportunities for walking and bicycling, and really continue to make those really fantastic places. I think the easiest one to think about is any rail station. It's kind of a natural node for walking and bicycling, but again, there's a lot of other ways to picture that. And then the secondly is building complete streets. If we have a street that is not comfortable for walking and bicycling, people will not choose to do that. So how do we build streets, and small streets, big streets, collectors arterials, local streets, all different types of streets that are really comfortable for people walking and bicycling, and give them an opportunity to be out of their car and traveling. I'm going to walk through, we came up with kind of 5 broad regional strategies for how to answer this question about encouraging more people to walk or bike. The first, as I've mentioned, is to really invest in communities. If we have a place that is good for it, make it great. If we have a place that is not great for it yet, start down that path. We lean very heavily on the National Walk and Bike Friendly Communities Award Program. There are 2 national programs that kind of give out an award through a tested metric for doing that. It's not critical for how we do our planning work, but that's kind of where we point cities. If you ask me what the region is doing for walking and bicycling, I will probably point you to what one of our cities is doing, because that's really where the nexus is in a lot of cases. But we're really here to support cities and continue to figure out how can we use regional funding or regional efforts to really support better walk and bike friendly cities. The second one, second strategy is focused on safety and equity, really under this kind of nationally emerging vision of Vision Zero, movement to eliminate traffic fatalities and how we talk about things. It is not reduced by 1, it is not moved towards 0, but it's set 0 as a clear target and work our way back from that to figure out how do we make decisions that really inform that. If you have heard me talk at all in the past year, you have probably seen me start to allude to this report, which is going to go up on the web today if anybody's curious about it, for public comment before our next TCC meeting, where I'll do a little bit more in-depth presentation on it. And I was particularly excited to include this in here because I think for y'all and your particular questions, anything around signalization or creative ways to use signing, marketing, signalization, and kind of that higher order level of decision making on big corridors is really fundamental. Better signing, better signalization, emerging technology tools are all really important to how we either retrofit corridors or start to think about corridors a little bit differently. So if you're curious at all about this, we're happy to talk about it. We leaned very heavily on FHWA's 10 proven safety countermeasures, although I think they've added a few this year, and their STEP 5 measures for pedestrian safety, to kind of enshrine those a little bit in ARC and how we direct our funding. So I'm very excited about this. It's been a busy few weeks correcting typos of the typos that got corrected. So happy to have it done, and looking forward to talking more about that. Our third strategy is to support regional transit. As I mentioned, there's almost no trip in the region that's going to be entirely on foot or by bike if you're outside of Midtown or maybe Decatur or Marietta or any other little small downtown area. So many of our walking trips really lean on the regional transit system, either rail, bus, or some combination express bus. So one of the best ways we can think to support walking in the region is to make sure that transit is great. It's everything it can be. I lean very heavily on Shana and lots of our other transit folks to figure out the operations for that, and we really love to interface with that kind of first and last mile connection question. I have coined the term annoyance threshold for getting, especially to the train stations, but even bus stops, if it is frustrating to get there, that is one impediment, even over headways and all the more technical transit stuff. So that's an area that I'm really excited that more, in particular, transit operators. Whose computer is this? Crazy thing. You got a quick preview of my whole presentation. But I think I'm really excited that transit operators, in particular MARTA, is selling off a bunch of their underutilized car parking lots, are really starting to think more about how do people get in and leave the system. So that's our third regional strategy. Fourth, as I mentioned, is building complete streets. This is where we really lean very heavily on y'all, the engineers, and in particular GDOT, who has come a long way in the past few years in terms of how the state talks about complete streets. We really kind of, the end of our regional planning really ends up against GDOT's design policy manual, a lot of the ways that the state approaches these questions. We're partnering with GDOT over the summer, starting in June, July, and August to do a little bit better drawing on how we as the region think about complete streets within the design policy manual framework. So we're very excited about that. And if you'll have me back at some future meeting, I'll be happy to give you an update on that. And someday, there we go. Our fifth strategy is really to talk better about regional trails or regional trail connections. We are fortunate to have two of the most important greenway trails in the southeast. The older one being the Silver Comet Trail that draws 2 million trips annually, and the Beltline, which is obviously kind of transforming how Atlanta and Atlantans think about active transportation uses. So our real question at the Regional Commission is how do we start to knit together some of these fabulous local projects? That particular connection, the Connect the Comet connection, is at the forefront of a lot of people's mind. I'm a super big champion of Path 400 and the opportunity to run a greenway trail from Buckhead to Sandy Springs in the 400 right-of-way. And if you haven't been up on that, it's a fabulous trail. But a lot of our great local governments, Cobb and Gwinnett in particular, have adopted greenway trail plans this year that really come back to the question of how do we build trails that do something? We have a lot of great trails that are fun places to go, but we would like to improve the use of them. Bringing people in from Cobb County to the Beltline obviously makes a much more transportation-oriented conversation than people driving out to the Silver Comet Trail on Saturdays, which is great in and of itself, but pushing trails to do a little bit more for the region, I think is really valuable. So I do enjoy talking, but I don't like to explain myself. So we have put everything that I've talked about up either in the Walk Bike Thrive Master Plan or a series of supplements that we have published over the past couple of years, including Safe Streets, which goes up online today. So I'm excited about that. It's been a fun couple of years of working on these, and I know I've worked with many of y'all on them, so I appreciate all of y'all's support.
Just a couple of really quick announcements. Don't forget, June 27th will be our technical training. It'll replace the monthly meeting. It'll be at Jacobs. Registration will be coming out soon. And Top Golf, June 29th. Registration again will be coming out soon. That'll be a fun night. It's a Friday night. And then ITS 5C Summit this October. It replaces the ITS Georgia annual meeting. So be on the lookout for registration. Should be opening up anytime now. So very soon. So thank you guys. Have a good day.